Welcome to the Caregiver Reality Show with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato, who bring you more than a combined 25 years of practical experience, helping thousands of family caregivers, helping them find solutions to the challenges and frustrations presented by this important responsibility. So if you are in the position of caring for a spouse or a parent, a loved one who is no longer able to care for themselves, or if you know someone who is, this hour will be worth the listening. Now, let's tune in to today's edition of Caregiver Reality with your hosts, David Levy and Paul Vadiato.
Good evening, South Florida, America, and the world. It's drive time on Tuesday, and this is the Caregiver Reality Hour. I'm your co-host, David Levy. I'm here with my other co-host, Paul Vadiato. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening, David. Good evening to our listeners.
And by the way, you're either hearing us on iHeartRadio, WWNN 1470 in South Florida on AM, a 50,000-watt station, so no excuse here in the South not to hear us. We're broadcast just about everywhere. We're online at caregiverreality.com, amp2.tv, and also wwnnradio.com. And eventually, because we had a long discussion with our producer today, it goes out everywhere. So when we say we are heard worldwide by millions, we're not kidding. And we thank you, because one of the reasons we're told it does as well as it does is because we have a very unique subject in non-clinical caregiving. And Paul and I have devoted between us over 50 years to understanding the caregiver and their needs, and we have helped to quantify the issues around non-clinical family caregiving, and we bring it to you every week along with what we think are relevant and important guests. Tonight we have Kerry Parnes, who we had spoken to on the radio a couple of weeks back, and she's the CEO of Florida and Philadelphia Mental Health Centers. They've got one that just recently opened here in South Florida at 2701 West Oakland Park Boulevard in Lauderhill, and we'll be giving you more information and a phone number about that. But she's here tonight along with a special guest, Emma, her therapy dog. Not that she needs the therapy dog, but she's training Emma, a golden retriever who is just the sweetest. We'll have her on camera in a little while. If you want to talk to her, get on that phone and woof. And so, Paul, as I ask you every week, how was your week in caregiving?
Thanks, David. Frustrating and worrisome. Debbie's been having some GI problems, and we've gone through a bunch of tests, and she's been in a lot of pain with it. And finally, we got some results. Medication was prescribed, but the insurance company would not approve the medication until another 9 had been already taken on medical records and found not to be effective. So the one that does help her is the one that will not be covered. And as a caregiver and as an advocate, I am just angry. David, how was your bride?
Well, she didn't have a great week either. She started out PT last week, and each time she came back, the next day was a disaster. The knees wouldn't work. She couldn't move. Today was one of those days when you have her affliction, dysautonomia. She woke up. She was nauseous. She couldn't pick her head up off the pillow. Fortunately, a long time ago, when they prescribed a medication called Zofran, we were able to load up on it. Now it's very tough to get it, all right, but we have a stash. And so that works very effectively, and it's the medication that they give chemotherapy patients when they have post-chemo nausea. And that seems to be the only thing, even though she's not on chemo, that works for dysautonomia. So it hasn't been a good week. We had, as a result, we had to miss Scott Solkoff, who's one of our sponsors. He had his Christmas party on Sunday, and unfortunately, as always, we're the couple.
Last minute.
Right, that are always the last minute. Sorry, we can't come. And once again, I apologize, Scott, but, it was beyond our control, and I don't do good as a bachelor, or I don't do well as a bachelor.
That too.
All right, that too. All right, and so we can't wait to get to Kerry in a few minutes. Paul, you were just talking about the issue of having to go through so many medications until you
Right.
can finally get to the right
Mm-hmm.
one. Last night on 60 Minutes was a variation on that story where they were talking about one of the big healthcare companies whose name you can just go online and see for yourself. But the issues became one of children that had mental health issues, bipolar, schizophrenic, autism spectrum, were being given like 5 or 6 treatments and then being told that they had improved and they didn't need any more. And there was a particular doctor who is named but who would not be interviewed, not by us but on the television
Mm-hmm.
last night, who handles a caseload of 550 patients a month, and his denial rate is around 94 to 95%. So with that particular company, if you have a mental health issue, especially with your children,
Right.
you can just about forget about getting anything more than a hello, a pat on the back, maybe a prescription, and
You're on your way.
after that, the system doesn't care. And part of the issues are that we have so many doctors that never see a patient, that are sitting behind the firewall of these insurance companies and making determinations about the outcome of people's health based on things that we will never understand, that they will never put in writing, other than you're denied. And going forward, especially now with Medicaid and having Medicaid Advantage type providers and getting tougher and tougher, notwithstanding accountable care, the issues going forward are constantly going to be, can you, even though your doctor feels this is what you need, and I'm sure at times there are doctors that want to treat more intensively than what may be the norm out of, usual and customary standard. But that's one thing. But when you're doing usual and customary and the insurance company turns around and says, I don't think so, and that person has never seen your patient, that's going to get more and more problematic. And I think it's a big issue, and the politicians are going to have to deal with it because they're the ones that help, at least here in Florida and elsewise, to set those Medicaid reimbursement rates.
David, I wish our listeners who are finding this to be a problem would go on to our Caregiver Reality Facebook page and tell us of the stories and the difficulties that you have. And perhaps collectively our voice will be loud enough that we can affect some change. It's just awful what's happening.
Right, and I remember back in when my wife was first diagnosed and dealing with Social Security, they had no idea what dysautonomia was. And the only reason that she was able to get an approval for Social Security disability was the person that was her Social Security advisor, as it were, was a PhD psychology student who was moonlighting for Social Security and was absolutely fascinated. He had never seen dysautonomia before and really made a study out of it through her. And he was the one that was able to help us get the coverage by attending every hearing, by making sure that the voice from the medical side, even though it wasn't clearly, you think it's not understood now, imagine what it was 15, 18 years ago, was clearly understood by the examiners, the examining doctors, etc. And so we were very, very lucky. But that's not always the case, that you get somebody on the other side that's an advocate for you. And I think that, as Paul said, please, we want to hear your story. If we hear your story and we can put it out there, remember that what goes on at Caregiver Reality and during the Caregiver Reality Hour eventually makes its way around the world. We spent a lot of time over the weekend with our producer following the trail of how this program has gained the millions of listeners and watchers. And even though traditional marketers at times may have a hard time believing what's going on out there, it has been very, very well documented. And I think that has a lot to do with why this program...
Folks,
this program makes
Yep.
sense because there are millions of caregivers in the United States and around the world, and we call it like it is. And we don't get involved on the medical side of the patient. We're here for the caregiver. That's what non-clinical caregiving is about. How do you do the practical problem solving to get through the day, get through the system, make sure your loved one is safe, that collectively your quality of life is worthwhile, and what are the secrets that you shouldn't have to learn by reinventing the wheel every day. You know, one of the reasons, and Paul, you were mentioning it a few times over the last 3 years, our book on non-clinical family caregiving and professional non-clinical family caregiving has been recognized by the Florida Department of Elder Affairs, the Florida Council on Aging. We just, in our new book, the 2014 revision, we just got accolades from the Department of Elder Affairs. We included that letter now in the new printing for the 2014 version. I don't say that for any other reason, but it's not us talking about our book. It's those that are really in a position to know that are talking about it. And if you want a copy, the Caregiver Reality, .com website, just go to shop. And even though right now the pictures are down for the book, the very first one that talks about the Caregiver Manual can be ordered right online, or go to Kindle and just put in David Levy, Caregiving, and the book will pop right up, and I think it's $6.99 or something like that if you want to read it on your Kindle or your Nook or electronically. But believe me, this is not a how did I take care of my mom or a list of lists. This is how do you effectively approach caregiving for the long term. And we all know, because we constantly talk about it, caregiving's going home. It's not going to be in facilities. It's not going to be anywhere else but under your roof and behind your doors and walls. And even though we love mom and our spouses and our kids, in order to be effective caregivers, it takes a different mindset and a mentality. And that's what this is all about. How do you become a good caregiver? And that's what it's all about. So I recommend it, not because we wrote it. I recommend it because it's damn good. It's been endorsed. And
belongs on everyone's bookshelf.
Yep, or on their electronic book. Right? And so without any further ado on that one, Paul, what else you got to say before we go to a break?
Well, before we go to the break, I'd like to share with you from my perspective, and this is something that we started not long ago, where we are looking at issues and we're bringing them to your attention. And this represents my opinion, and I was thinking...
not that of the station.
And not that of the station. But I remember when I was a kid playing ball, and there would be an argument or a contention over something. Somebody would yell up, "Do-over," and then it was like it never happened again, and the game continued. And it got me to thinking a little bit. Maybe we need some do-overs in this world that we live in as it applies to caregivers. And listen, see what you think, and share your opinions with me on our Facebook page. First, I think we need a do-over on the Affordable Care Act so that there is a single-payer option, like Medicare. The exchanges have gotten way too complicated for the average person, and little help that is unbiased is available to make these decisions. I think we need a do-over on the way health care is accessed so that for the poor, the emergency room is not the primary care doctor. I think we need a do-over such that everyone has some level of health care access, even like a Canadian-style baseline, and you can build up from there depending upon what you want. That would be a good starting point, in my opinion. I think we need a do-over such that medical providers are compensated fairly, meaning out of the fee for service, we move out of the fee for service and more into a outcome-based reimbursement, value-based, such that the doctors are compensated for the wellness. And as we continue on, I'm going to share more of these do-overs in the weeks to come and get a little bit of an opportunity to speak about what you think about it. David, any thoughts on the ones we went over tonight?
Well, I think every one of them is case in point. I think that healthcare, even though we've got open and closed enrollment and people don't know what to do, and I spoke about this a couple of weeks back because it was impossible for me to be able to guide clients effectively into which Medicare Advantage program because it was so impossible without having to go through an agent who was looking to close you, and I mean that respectfully. Without being able to understand what they were offering, who was on their panels, what were their drugs, etc. So I agree with you, and you just helped to gild the lily a little bit more.
Well, I was in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago, as you remember.
Hold that thought, because they're making faces at us to take a break. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back and hear the Philadelphia story, and then we're going to hear and speak with Kerry Parnes, and we're going to have an opportunity to see Emma, the therapy dog, which is worth it all by itself. So take it away for the break.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse or loved one who can no longer take care of himself or herself? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Do you feel burned out, frustrated, and just don't know where to turn? You have tried doctors, lawyers, and mental health professionals and have come to realize that they don't have practical answers to these questions. What you need are experts, non-clinical family caregivers with 25 years of active experience helping thousands of family caregivers like yourself. People who can help you provide a better quality of life for yourself and your loved one. Who you need are David Levy or Paul Vadiato. Reach David at david@caregiverreality.com or reach Paul at caregiverreality.com and let them help you pick the right path towards improving the quality of life for you, the caregiver, and your loved one.
This is Paul Vadiato, co-host of Caregiver Reality Hour. As a spousal caregiver, I know that sometimes things get rough and sometimes we lose perspective. David Levy and I have over 50 years experience and expertise on advising caregivers. If you find that you need help, you're a little confused, reach out to us at Paul or David at caregiverreality.com. We're there to help.
This is Caregiver Reality with gerontologist David Levy and caregiver expert Paul Vadiato, who ask you to call in and speak with him on the air toll-free at 888-565-1470. That's 888-565-1470 to share a story or important information. Now, back to today's Caregiver Reality Show.
And we're back. And just as we promised, that was Paul. I'm going to let you just real quick finish up the Philadelphia story, and then I've got to say
Riding
before we go.
Philadelphia. Waiting from medicine like your dad. She said, no, I spoke to my dad, and he says I'd be better off going to the world of business to be able to make some money. So clearly the doctors are having trouble.
So while we have on our equipment, right? We're going to have. But we're back. You're listening to us on CaregiverReality.com, WWNN 1470 AM, that big 50,000-watt blaster here in South Florida, AMP2.TV, WNNRadio.com, iHeartRadio, and as I always say, then those million other places around the world where we wind up building our numbers, talking to the world, and trying to bring a little more illumination to the world of family caregiving. Anyway, tonight we have Kerry Parnes with us. As I said, she is the CEO of the Florida and Philadelphia Mental Health. Is that Incorporated? Mental Health Center. They're here now in Lauderhill on Oakland Park Boulevard. They're also in Center City, Philadelphia? And in some of the outlying. Okay, and they're doing a tremendous job. She's going to be talking about it. There's a whole bunch of credentials that I could give, but I really want her to speak. She's a master's degree psychotherapist. Her father started this in 1953. The thing that wowed me, and I've said it to people since I found out about it a few weeks ago, on the original board was Pearl Buck and Theodore Reich, who worked with Freud. I mean, can you ask for better oversight than a group like that?
And David, in
What?
in the front window of where the center is right now
Oh,
is the original couch of Dr. Porns.
No kidding.
Yeah.
You mean, so they really did have a couch?
Sure did.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's dynamite. Well, anyway, Carrie, thank you so much for coming down. I know you're now a resident of Vero in order to spend more time developing the Florida facility, and we certainly want to hear a lot more about that. And last time you weren't sure where you were because you just moved in. So once again, that is 2701 West Oakland Park Boulevard, Suite 301. I'll give you the number in a minute, but let's go. Paul's got a bunch of questions for Carrie, and I don't know if you can see her right hand, and she's petting Emma, who is just the loveliest golden retriever therapy
Service dog, right.
service dog, excuse me, that she rescued last, what was it, August?
Yeah.
And is just a sweetheart. Paul?
Carrie, thanks so much for joining us again. And last visit brought such a tremendous response as you discussed the spectrum of autism. And sort of going back a little bit, give us an understanding of what autism is and why it's described as being on a spectrum and some of the associated behaviors that some of our listeners and viewers might be experiencing.
The truth is that no one knows exactly what autism is. We don't know exactly where it comes from. We don't know exactly what causes it, but it is a spectrum, a collection of physical, psychological, emotional
Manifestations.
disorders. Manifestations is a much better word. That typically interfere with an individual's ability to form social relationships, to process different kinds of information. Adjusted, okay. To process information, to receive and to read emotions, to communicate emotions, to take in sensory information. It's a broad spectrum because some people with autism are in the very low IQ range. The majority are in the normal or high IQ range.
So it really isn't a question of being necessarily low IQ. It's
Not
the
at all.
ability of the brain, the ears, the eyes, to be able to coordinate, hear, respond, and to be able then, I know ultimately because I have a granddaughter that is on the autism spectrum, that it's both behavioral as well as the inability to concentrate, stay focused. That happens to be her manifestations. I'm sure it takes a wide range across that whole autism, as we call it, the spectrum. I don't want to be redundant, but
Right.
all right.
That is correct. And then in addition to that, there are many, many children with autism who also have ADHD.
Mhm.
There are many, many children who have gastrointestinal issues.
Right. The
So-
ADHD is attention deficit.
Attention deficit disorder.
Right. Okay. Just because some of our audience doesn't know the acronyms, and we're so used to.
Hyperactive.
Okay. Very good. We all have a little of
Yeah.
that.
Carrie, when you were here last time, you had said that getting evaluated early is just so important.
Absolutely.
Can you give us the why of that and what is exactly involved in evaluation?
Although we don't understand completely where autism comes from, we do know that the behaviors and the difficulties are based in the brain and its ability to function. And so if we can, and the brain is functioning, the brain is developing most actively from birth through age 6. So if we can get in with a child, and we can now diagnose them at about 1 year of age, at least with a developmental delay, if not with autism.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get in with them when they're 1, when they're 18 months, when they're 2 years old or 3 years old, we can have a massive effect, a tremendous effect on the child as their brain is developing. So it's as if we're supercharging the therapy. We can have 10 times the effect that we can have on
While
a
that
child
brain
who
is
doesn't
learning,
right.
It's learning properly.
Because the brain is developing. As opposed to a child that is diagnosed when they're 10, so much of the development has taken place. It's not that we can't help them, we can, but not to the degree and not with the same impact that we can with a 2-year-old.
How does a parent, a caregiver, mother or father, whatever it may be, recognize autism in the first 18-month period, especially if it's a first child and you do not have any comparative to go against?
Right. They're not going to recognize autism, but they are going to recognize a certain degree of developmental delay. We're a first-time parent, we go and get a baby book, and we read the development of my infant,
Right.
and we see that they may not be walking, they may not be talking when they're supposed to, they may not be making eye contact, they may not be beginning interactive play, they may not be able to play peekaboo at the appropriate age. That doesn't make them laugh. They don't seem to be really connected somehow to their mother, to their father. They don't begin when they're around 2 years old. They don't begin parallel play with other children, which you'll read about in the books. You get them to a psychologist who has experience in autism or developmental delays, or a developmental pediatrician, and they'll be able to do an assessment and to tell you whether they have concerns.
And then act upon that at that point.
And then make recommendations.
Right.
And not every child that is developmentally delayed will end up having autism. But again, even if it's just a developmental delay, why not get in there and help them so that they can keep up with their peers and move through whatever they need to?
Would your average pediatrician be able to spot it if they're not a developmental? Most of us don't know whether we have a developmental pediatrician, but we got a good pediatrician.
Right. Your average good pediatrician will be able to see that the child is not meeting the typical age-appropriate markers, and then would refer you to a specialist.
Okay.
So yes, your first step could be to just call your pediatrician and say, I'm a little
Something
worried.
doesn't look right.
Carrie, from your last visit, I think what brought the biggest response from our viewers was when you spoke about some new rulings that came out regarding Medicaid and autism. Can you elaborate exactly what is going on and what's available to our listeners?
Absolutely. In 2014, the Supreme Court of Florida ruled that any person, any child who is diagnosed with autism is entitled to services that Medicaid will pay for. There are services that are or can be supplied by a licensed behavior specialist, by a master's level therapist, a clinician, and by a bachelor's level specially trained therapeutic support staff. All of these can be supplied in the home. It is support not only for the individual diagnosed with autism, but through the mobile therapy in the home, also to the caregivers, to the family. Very often there's therapy needed for the parents, for the couple, for the family, for the siblings,
To
and of
all
course
understand.
for the individual. And Medicaid will pay for this. Now, there are not a lot of places that are set up to provide these services. That is why Philadelphia Mental Health Center opened the Florida Mental Health Center and then the Florida Comprehensive Autism Center in Fort Lauderdale, because we are set up to provide those services and to bill it for children in Broward and to bill Medicaid for the services.
And this
provided.
is not income tested. This is available to any child.
Correct. It has nothing to do with an individual's income or family's income. It has to do with the diagnosis of the child. We can provide that diagnosis and we can walk a person through the process of applying for Medicaid coverage on the basis of the diagnosis.
So the evaluation is covered along with the help for getting the Medicaid.
It is.
So if a pediatrician now knows that you're on Oakland Park Boulevard in Lauderhill, the greater Fort Lauderdale area, and they refer, then you can help that child by the diagnosis that you do, or that
Right.
the pediatrician may have
The
done as well.
pediatrician may diagnose with autism and then send them to us, in which case they're already diagnosed. And then we can help the parent to, we can direct them where they need to go to sign up for Medicaid and how to do it. In other words, to explain to the Medicaid, to the worker in the Medicaid office that this has nothing to do with income, that this has to do with the diagnosis. Hopefully they've been trained in that and they'll know. As in all walks of life, sometimes the parents have to have the information with them to move it along.
Right.
But yes, then all of we get the approval through Tallahassee for the Medicaid coverage, and we provide services in the child's home, in their school, in the community, whatever and wherever is appropriate for that child as determined by our licensed clinician.
And this is Florida. Are there similar provisions in other states?
Most states have these provisions. We have been doing this in Pennsylvania for 25 years.
Wow.
It is unusual and unfortunate that Florida did not make this ruling until this year. Up
Well,
until
at least
now,
they did it.
But they did it. Until now, the only Medicaid coverage, the only kind of services for a child with autism were self-pay.
That's a good question.
And now Medicaid will pay for it.
Right. Does Medicaid, which historically, has been, the reimburser kind of a last resort when it's means tested, when it's dependent on income, do they reimburse commensurate with what these professionals could earn, or is it below that?
It is very much below that, and one of the biggest problems that we have at the Florida Comprehensive Autism Center is finding staff that are willing to work for us.
Mm-hmm.
We must have, and of course we want to have, the best quality staff, but those people can sit in an office or work in a private practice or work in a group practice and make twice what they can make with us because of what Medicaid will reimburse us. If we keep a couple dollars off the top to keep the lights on and pay the secretary to answer the phone, the rest of it goes to the clinician, and it's still half of what they can make elsewhere. And that's a huge problem. The state of Florida is going to need to address that.
I think some of our Floridians need to let their legislators know that this is important and more money needs to be appropriated.
Absolutely. It's the reason, I believe, why we are the only agency in Broward County that is providing these services for children on the spectrum that can be billed to Medicaid, because there just is no money in it.
Well, and not only is this the parents' issue, but for our millions of listeners, and not just here in Florida, but wherever it may be, grandparents, these are your grandkids. And, the power of the vote, even though we may not always like our legislators, but this is an issue that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, or whatever the issue may be, all right, nieces, nephews, however you're related, are going to grow up with. And if we can't get the proper reimbursement and get to these children early to make a positive effect on their life and kind of catch them in that growth spurt to make a difference, then not only are we going to spend a lot more money with these children going forward when they can't be as readily helped, but it's going to be a lifetime issue. And, we just can't set up the funding for a lifetime, so it certainly pays right now to focus on getting an early diagnosis and getting the proper reimbursement so we get the right people.
The best people.
The best people that we can get in there. And this is an everybody issue. This isn't just the parents. This is the whole.
David, I believe the numbers right now are 1 in 54. One child in 54 are being diagnosed right now on the spectrum.
Wow.
If we do not get in with these children and do something, at least half of them are not going to be able to live independently. We are going to need to support them with Social Security. We are going to need to put them in institutions. We are going to need to have group homes. We are going to have thousands and thousands and millions of children, adults, eventually adults, that we need to support as a society. The heartbreak of this is that if we can get in with these children when they're 2, when they're 3, when they're 5, and work with them, a vast majority can be functioning adults. Many of them have very high IQs. Many of them can go to college. Many of them can have careers, can support themselves, can live on their own, can have families. It literally is the difference between setting ourselves up for supporting millions of people 20, 30 years from now
who don't need us as a crutch.
Who wouldn't need it if we would get in and supply what they need now as children.
So what we really need to do is to see this as an investment and not as an expense.
Absolutely. And it is truly that. It is an investment.
We're investing in our children. We're making a difference in their lives, but we're also making a difference in the whole quality of life of what it is like going forward in America and other places in the world where you have such a I mean, when I was growing up, back when wagons had wooden wheels, we didn't know from autism. We knew if there was a child that was born with, let's say, Down syndrome or something like that.
They were different.
But to see it now at a level where 1 out of every 50 children are being, born into this spectrum is an awesome amount of people. I don't think we have anywhere near that are being born, not born, but are now living with or contracting dementia as a result. That would be my parallel looking back, because they can no longer function for themselves, need to depend on the system. So, I mean, this is a crisis out there, America and the world, and we need to address it.
Let us know your thoughts. Carrie, moving away from autism just for a while, I was so impressed when I went out to visit the center in Philadelphia and met some of the wonderful people that are there. You're just doing some amazing things. Tell us of the problems that you are addressing with some of the children there and just the sheer numbers that you're working with.
At any given time in our numerous Philadelphia offices, Philadelphia and surrounding counties, we're working with about 1,000 children and their families. Probably about 50% are on the spectrum, and the other 50% have more intense behavioral health needs, where sometimes they come in for outpatients, sometimes they need services in the schools and in the homes. It is everything from bipolar to schizophrenia to intense hyperactivity, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, extreme anxiety, panic attacks, a whole myriad of issues.
Does it get into the eating disorders and things like that, like bulimia, anorexia?
We do not specialize in that, but we certainly have children who have some of those issues, and we would normally refer them to a center that specializes in that, and we would work on the behavioral health issues while they're working on the eating disorder.
And at any given time, how many children are being helped?
About 1,000.
About 1,000 children.
Wow.
What a tremendous reach. God bless you.
And we are very much an organization that focuses on the family. So we are, if we're working with a child, we really are trying to get the parents to come in as well, to get the siblings to come in. We run groups, support groups. We do marriage counseling. We do family therapy, because any kind of physical or mental health condition affects the family. It's a family concern.
Paul?
Family caregivers.
Right. I just want to say one thing, because we're not going to take a break, Carrie, because this is just
Too important.
Too important. But I do want to say that, one of our sponsors over the last year has been the medical research charities. And I do want to say that, just in line with what you're talking about, not only is it treatment, but it's also research. And here is an umbrella organization that deals with 29 research organizations, including Scripps and for Alzheimer's and for various mental health issues and physical issues like cancer, etc. And it is so important that we never take our eyes off of the research, because as you just said, if we're having 1 in 54 children, or whatever that statistic is, that are being born with the spectrum, we have a lot of work to do, because if I'm correct, we don't really understand why it's happening, do we? I mean, other than it's a brain, I heard recently that people that have certain kinds of difficult pregnancies may be prone to having a child with this kind of a disorder.
We have a lot of pieces of it, but we don't have a final answer.
Okay. So it's still going to take a lot of research and a lot of understanding.
Absolutely, and it's only been through research that we have progressed over the past 10 years in particular to the point where we can treat autism the way we do now, that we really can understand and recognize the symptoms of autism. 10 years ago, most of our clinicians had no idea what to do with autism.
Right.
And it took a lot of training, and it took a lot of research.
Even to figure that out.
Even to figure that out, and to identify what the different manifestations are and how we can best help these children and adults. So research is crucial.
Right, and so to conclude that, medical research charities, and you can find them at medicalresearchcharities.org. Click them on, take a look. If you've got a particular research organization or a particular affliction that you think you want to support,
Close to
or
home.
make a donation directly to them, and it will be spread over the underlying organizations. That's medicalresearchcharities.org. Good people, and they
Holiday
deserve your
season,
assist.
good to remember them.
Right.
Kerry, the Florida Mental Health Center is now open and running. Can you give us an update as to how that's going, and what do you see as next for the center?
We started as the Florida Comprehensive Autism Center because of the huge need for autism services and our special niche and knowledge in treating autism. But we have expanded into becoming the Florida Mental Health Center, and the autism piece is tucked under that. We are expanding to treat children with a multitude of diagnoses, and we expect over the next year to eventually treat adults as well for all kinds of, a whole myriad of mental health issues. We have, like I said, we have some bachelor's level people that go out into the home, but we have trained clinicians both in the office, master's level therapists in the office and who will go out to the home. We have behavior specialists. We will have a psychiatrist coming. We will have the capacity to do telepsychiatry. Ooh. So we'll be doing psychiatry both in the home and telepsychiatry. I believe in the next year one of our goals is also to be able to do teletherapy for those people who may be homebound or maybe don't want to come into a mental health facility.
Well, it's no different than e-classroom.
Yeah.
You know, in this case, it's e-mental health.
On demand almost.
Absolutely, and
Right.
there's so much that we can
Right.
do with that.
Isn't that the beauty of where we are in this technology day and age, that we can do therapy potentially,
Oh, absolutely.
even though it may have to be crafted for the individual, but at our convenience, at 9 o'clock at night or 3 a.m. or, whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
That's the beauty of a viral, hooked up world.
Yep.
Kerry, you know that we're all about family caregivers, non-clinical family caregiving. And some of these families struggle with great difficulty day in, day out with their loved ones trying to handle these kind of problems. What do you say to them?
While you're taking care of your loved one, don't forget to put the oxygen mask on yourself. You need to take care of yourself. There is no one who is... when I was listening to you talk at the beginning of the show, the two of you, one of the things I was thinking about was there is no one who does not have not only some physical condition, but some mental health condition. That's just reality. We don't like to talk about that, but that's the truth. There is no one who does not sometimes suffer from anxiety, from depression, from some degree of some kind of mental health issue, and particularly because of the stress around caring for a loved one, whether it's your child, your spouse, your parent, who has a physical or mental, severe physical or mental illness, so that you really are a caregiver, you're going to also have issues, and you need to get that support and help for yourself. Whether it's going to a free support group, whether it's hooking into Caregiver Reality and going to your groups, whether it's getting a therapist for yourself to talk about your stress, your anxiety, whether it's joining a gym or going to a yoga class. Whatever you do for yourself, you do need to recognize that it is a tremendous physical and psychological
It's a really,
toll.
as a caregiver, Carrie, it really is difficult. I mean, intellectually we know we should do that, but when the need is in front of you, it's hard, and we just need to keep that in mind. You got to take care of yourself first.
I do understand, because I've also been a caregiver.
Right. And
I don't think there's anyone who hasn't
Yeah.
been a caregiver.
no, and the issue of caregiving is you either were, are, will be, or you're going to do it again. You know, you did it for
Absolutely.
grandma, and you may wind up doing it for mom, and you may have to do it for your spouse, or as you're pointing out, a special needs child. Caregiving is universal, doesn't pick on age or disease, and is insidious. And
Absolutely.
it just doesn't stop. And that's why we bring the message. Paul and I get up every morning, and we check on one another. We are
Excellent.
the two-person support group. But tomorrow, if anybody is around in the Del Rey area, I'll be doing my Alzheimer's support group for caregivers of Alzheimer's at Grand Villa, and that's on Via Flora, right off of Atlantic Avenue in Del Rey, and it's open to everybody. We start at 9:30 and we go to 11:30, and it's a very, very good group. You'll learn, you'll understand. You can just sit there and listen. Caregivers rise and fall at all levels, and don't be afraid to seek help. We all need it. And if Paul and I need it, and we've been doing it for as long as we have, believe me, others need it as well. You can't bull your way through caregiving.
Carrie, many people have these mental health issues in their family, but they don't seek out the help that they should. What are some of the myths that are associated with this that keep people away from getting help?
I think the most major myth is that mental illness is a terrible thing that only other people have. Why do we think that we should go to the dentist twice a year and get our teeth cleaned? We should take our child when they're small. Why do we think that we of course need to have a pediatrician? We of course need to have a primary care
Physician for our own
for ourselves. We need to go to a yearly checkup, but we don't need any sort of mental health support. And if we do, there's something terribly wrong with us. And that's the problem. There's a stigma and there's a misunderstanding about mental health. It is nothing separate from physical health. It is integrated. We are integrated physical and psychological beings that
Right, our
have,
brain is attached to our
our
neck.
brain is attached. And there's nothing wrong or abnormal about our brain having glitches and symptoms.
And why wouldn't you want to make it better?
Why wouldn't you want to make it better? Why wouldn't you want to learn about it? Why are you afraid to say, I have some symptoms? You're not afraid to go and say, my knee hurts. I've been limping a little bit.
Right.
I want to get an X-ray but we're afraid to go to a therapist or a psychiatrist and say, I've been having really bad dreams that are disturbing my sleep, or I've been having a tremendous amount of anxiety and I get heart palpitations sometimes and I don't know why. This is not abnormal. This is normal stuff that happens in the course of everyone's lifetime. And if we would admit this and begin to talk about it and allow it and look at ourselves as just simply human beings with a body
With
and a
stuff.
mind,
Yeah.
then we can begin to work through some of that stigma, which is really left from the dark ages.
And there is a difference between being sad and being depressed.
Absolutely.
And you can't walk it off, and it's not the flu. It has to be treated.
Absolutely. It
Well
has to be
said.
treated, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
In fact, It could mean that there's something right with you, that you're actually taking in and reacting to circumstances in your life
That you're not aware of.
or to a genetic predisposition
Mm-hmm.
that is an issue that you have to deal with,
Such as addictions.
such as addictions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're genetically predisposed, and you know that because you have a parent or an uncle or a grandparent who was an alcoholic or an addict of some kind, and if you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, there's a genetic piece there.
Of course
And
there is.
it can be helped, and you deal with it, and you move on with your life.
And the family
Just
needs
like
to
having-
deal with it also.
Absolutely, just
Right.
like having diabetes.
You know, in the course of all these years that we've dealt with caregiving, one of the things that often is overlooked, and I think when it comes to the autism spectrum, is the impact on siblings.
Mm.
You know, they're the unsung heroes of Johnny's a little different, and we have to make sure that he doesn't get in trouble, or you can't be a soccer mom because Johnny needs you to take him to therapy, and so other children can be resentful. As much as they want to help, a lot of times we don't assume that our children can understand what Johnny's condition is, so it's just Johnny's different. And I've seen that so often that kids, even the dog, when things aren't right, knows it's
Right.
not right. Right, Emma?
Or sometimes the sibling falls into being the good child,
Mm-hmm.
the child that never causes any problems, the child that doesn't really have needs. But of course they really do, and they go unspoken and unmet for way too long.
Carries on the rest of their life.
Yes.
Sure. Your
Absolutely.
pattern for
Yeah.
And these are things that when we bring a family in for family therapy, or we create a group and we have siblings come in for sibling group therapy support, we can talk about these things, and we can help families to negotiate through these in a healthier way, and to know that they're not alone.
and then to have the family realize, you know, that sounds just like Uncle Lester. You know,
Yes.
and you realize it really was in the family,
Right.
but you know, he was just tetched. You know, we didn't have a good word
Exactly.
for it. You know?
Exactly.
Carries, pragmatically, financial resources for some families are very limited. And if they suspect that there are these type of issues, mental health issues, autism and so forth, what advice do you have for them in terms of getting help if they want it?
Well, again, because Medicaid in this state is now paying for mental health treatment for children, I think that they need to pursue that. And you can call. Call your hotlines, call Tallahassee, call your representative, and find out where are the agencies in your area that do treat and will bill through Medicaid.
And by the way, your number is 954-233-1810. And for those of you in the Broward area that would like to have a conversation with the Mental Health Center and the Comprehensive Autism Division that's under it, it's 2701 West Oakland Park Boulevard, Suite 301, but that number is 954-233-1810. 954-233-1810. If you have any doubts, any questions, it's your children, it's your grandchildren. Don't overlook it. Here's a great opportunity to find out what you may either be overlooking, in denial, or seeking treatment and don't know where to go.
You
So,
can also go to fmhccares.org.
again?
That's Florida Mental Health Center.
fmhccares.org.
Okay.
Carrie, in the last few minutes before we close out, I want to give you the floor. Speak to our listeners. What do you want to tell them?
Autism is a huge issue. It is not going away. And while we are in the process of setting up these kinds of services in Florida, there is not the appropriate money to support the quality services for us to get the staff to provide the services that you need, that you're entitled to, that your children need to live a healthy, productive life and to progress. So one of the things that you can do is to get in touch with your legislator and let them know that you're concerned about the Medicaid dollars and what's available and the rates that are absolutely just not workable for reasonable care, and that you want it addressed. You want it addressed, that it's an important issue for now, for your children. It's an important issue for our entire society for the future.
Carrie, we cannot thank you enough for taking time to join us tonight, to give us this insight into this just so large of a problem that we're facing here, not only in this country, but everywhere in the world. Thank you for coming tonight.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I
David,
always enjoy talking
you wanna,
with you.
Sorry, thank you.
Right.
David, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, and I just want to say this has been a fascinating conversation. You know, going forward with people like Carrie and others, we're going to be having discussions like caregiving and mental health.
Yes.
And panels. And now that you're here in Florida, because you have your hand on so many qualified individuals, this is where some of our effort is going to go. Caregiving because the caregiver that we know that's out there can be anyone and any kind of an affliction at any age. So we can't just talk about Alzheimer's, and while we talk about autism, we can't overlook stroke, we can't overlook cardiac, we can't overlook anything.
And Alzheimer's is always
Right,
going to be around.
And the point we're making is that caregiving is everywhere. It cares not about age, it cares not about the affliction, and it doesn't care who it attacks, and money will not resolve caregiving. And so, America, South Florida, and the world, I mixed it up a little tonight, but that's all right. I want to thank you for listening. We'll be back next week, Drive Time, another special guest. In the meantime, you can see us everywhere at CareGiverReality.com. And Freddie, I want to thank you for another great show, and Linda, who just came in, and most of all, who's been sleeping through the show, which says how good it was, is Emma, the dog, the golden retriever on the floor. Anyway, I want to thank everybody, and we'll see you next week. Paul, have a good evening.
Thank you, and thank you again for joining us tonight. And as Carrie said, and as I say every week, caregivers, take care of yourselves. Have a great week.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Reality Show. Each week, David Levy, a gerontologist, and Paul Vadiato, a caregiver expert with a combined over 25 years of experience, providing practical and realistic help to caregivers struggling to keep up with the needs of a loved one who are unable to care for himself or herself. To reach David Levy, email him at david@caregiverreality.com. Or to reach Paul Vadiato, email paul@caregiverreality.com. And find out more online. Just go to caregiverreality.com. See you next week for another exciting show of Caregiver Reality.